闻西风，闻白云，这难道是我的命运？
massacre 你唔知，一定禮拜看到報紙咧揭曉是唔是？啊
？49年了。Hi everyone, welcome to Carolyn Talks, the podcast / YouTube channel where I, your host, Carolyn Hines, film critic and journalist, speak to film creatives around the world about their work, the industry, and what inspires them. And today is one of my interviews for the 2024 New York Asian Film Festival, and I'm very happy to be joined by filmmaker Chong Keat Aun to talk about his film Snow in Midsummer, which it's a musical, but not quite a musical. And you'll see what I mean when I get into the interview. But it's basically a film about Malaysia's past with regards to political strife that took place in May of 1969, and then again in May of 2018. And it reveals some history. If you're not familiar with Malaysian political history, I wasn't to this extent, about a fire and riots that took place on May the 13th. So I'm very excited to talk to director Chong Keat Aun about this. And our interpreter is Vincent. So thank you, Vincent, for joining us. So my first question is for you, director. This is a history that is, I was doing some research and I found that this particular riot that took place in May the 13th of 1969 isn't widely discussed in Malaysian history, in general. I even saw one website that says that it's actually kind of taboo to discuss it. Can you talk about that first? Because I thought it was an interesting something interesting to learn about it, because that it was actually taboo to discuss it. So can you talk about that first?
这一段历史在马来西亚来说，因为从1969年到现在已经过了55年，因为在那个时候发生的时候是这个大选之后，那其实就是那个暴动就在大选之后，所以到现在其实很多的一些经过那段历史的老人家，尤其是长辈还是很怕。它算是我们马来西亚的一段挥之不去的白色恐惧。
So this history actually traces all the way back to 1969 until now. It's been 55 years, and during all these time, that people really find hesitation to discuss them because it's part of the White Terror. And what happened during that time is that right after the January elections in 1969, there were these riots. And unrest happened as a result of that. And a lot of people live through that experience, especially elderlies that live through that experience. They still have that sort of unshakable trauma with them until today. And they just didn't want to talk about it at all.
那这段历史到现在，我们马来西亚的官方政府还是没有正视它，所以当天晚上的死伤，它仍然是一个谜。所以过去这么多年，其实虽然我们有在网络上的一些新闻有报道，可是通过电影来拍摄的话，这部作品算是在这个时代出现，它还是依然是一个禁忌。
So up till this point, there's no official account of the injured and the deceased during this particular periods of unrest. So there have been news reports here and there about what happened that day, but again, not official accounts of what actually happened and the deaths and the injuries. As a film to actually depict this particular topic, up till today, this point, it is still very much a taboo.
那会拍这部电影主要也是因为我在2009年就发现了这一座乱葬岗。那因为我本身是做这个社区跟社会运动的，那算是一个志工。 那么我本身也曾经在国家的广播电台工作，也算是一个媒体人，所以那时候就开始收集这方面的资料。那直到2009年发现了乱葬岗之后呢，因为这座乱葬岗在马来西亚来说，它算是唯一一座找到就是当天晚上被埋的这些遇难者，所以我就针对这个乱葬岗就进行了大概长达接近10年左右的这个口述历史，就每一年在纪念日的时候等待这个家属来扫墓。
So by happen chance, I actually came across this particular mass grave in 2009. At the time, I have different roles. I am a volunteer as a community advocate or activist, and also participant of many different social movements. And at the same time, I'm also a media practitioner that I work in a national radio station. So I came across this particular mass grave and realized that this is actually where those souls that perished on the day of the May 13th in 1969. So I decided to really do some thorough research by waiting at the burial site to try to wait for any type of family members of the victims who will come to visit and to sweep the tombs for their loved ones. And then through them, I can then collect oral histories to document what actually happened from their perspective. And I did that for the past 10 years before I actually make this film.
So in spending 10 years to collect these oral histories, which is a very long time, how did that change your perspective? Before asking about filmmaking, how did that just change your perspective as a community activist and advocate? Because that's going to change the way how you look at your country, how you look at your community, how you look at your people, and I guess even how you look at yourself and how you yourself fit into all of this. How did going through these oral histories for such a long period of time change all of that for you?
因为我大概在20多岁就开始参与一些社区的口述，跟做一些所谓的社区的运动。那开始的时候都是一些守护一些拆迁的一些老社区。那坦白说，当时20多岁到30岁之间，算是一个愤怒青年。所以庆幸的是，就这部电影是在我40岁之后拍摄，所以可能年龄的一个问题，就是到40岁之后呢，就心情也比较平和一些。所以我想说，如果在30多岁的时候拍，也许它不是长这样的。那另外一个点，当然就是在过程中，本来我们想要拍一个纪录片的，可是因为我们找到的这些家属，他们都不愿意面对镜头，后来我们就想，倒不如就把它变成了一个 feature film， 就是一个剧情片。对。
So starting in my 20s, I actually already participated in a lot of collections of the oral histories through my activism, through my advocacy for the communities, to try to preserve old neighborhoods being or planned to be demolished, and we're trying to preserve them. And at the time, I was younger and also full of anger and idealism. And I think that it took me a while to do the research for this film. And it's not until when I was in my 40s to start shooting these films. And I think because of the maturity, because of the age, and I tend to take definitely a lot more peaceful approach, gentle approach to my filmmaking. I don't think that the film will turn out the same way if I made it in my 30s. So the other aspect of this is also in the beginning, I thought that I wanted to make a documentary about this particular burial site. And because the fact that a lot of the victims' families and who survived this particular tragedy, they didn't really want to be on camera. They don't want to be seen and be identified. And therefore, I really need to find a different way to tell the stories. And then I decided to turn that into a narrative film.
那当然，在采集的过程中，听了无数的一些家属的一些访问。开始的时候，当然因为官方的一些说法都说这是一个种族暴动，可是后来我们做了一些口述，然后收集了一些资料，我们发觉到其实种族暴动其实是一个比较容易去处理的一个官方的借口，可是对我们来说，它其实并不是一个种族暴动，它其实是一个政治的一个手段跟阴谋，就是分化种族。所以其实在马来西亚，虽然我们是一个 多元民族国家，其实长期以来我们都很和谐共处的。可是有一点非常重要，就是当做这方面的采集越来越多，我就发觉到其实我们种族之间是没有问题，只不过因为每一次大选要到来的时候呢，政治人物就会用这个513发生的事件作为一个恐吓，打个比方说你们要好好的选，不然的话可能这个暴动会再重来，这就变成了一个所谓的一直挥之不去的白色恐惧。当然对年轻人是无效的，对老年人还就比较有效。
So through numerous interviews I had with the family members who survived the tragedy, that I realized that in the beginning that people tend to think that this is the reason for the riots and for this particular tragedy and incident is because of ethnic and racial unrest, conflict and clash. And I do think that that will be a very much of an excuse or justification from the official standpoint, because they can really use this as a way of a political conspiracy or strategies for the next election. So, for example, if you find a way to use May 13th incident as an example to become a divisive aspect to threaten the voters, saying that if you don't vote the way that you should vote, then maybe the incident will happen again. So I do think that at the time, I do think that we are a very diverse and multicultural society, and we got along pretty well in terms of across different ethnic and racial lines. And I think that it's unfortunate that some politician will use this as a way to gain some votes or to maintain their status quo and their power by using this as either political strategy or political justification.
I agree, because something I was going to get to this later, but I'm going to talk about it now because you just mentioned it. Because I find the film doesn't talk it when it focuses on the relationships between everyone. It's not the strife doesn't come because of their racial or ethnic backgrounds, because the film is made up of because it talks about indigenous Malaysian people as well as the Baba Nyonya. Yeah, I did some research because I had never heard the term before, but I looked it up, and they're like basically Chinese immigrants who immigrated to all across Southeast Asia in the beginning of the 14th century. And so like you have their community in there, which is the lead character, Aung. She's a descendant of those. So you have her, but then you also have people from like mainland China who immigrated at more recent times in 1969. So I found it interesting that the film, while you're showing all of these different ethnicities and nationalities, people living within Malaysia, the strife doesn't come for that. You make it very plain that the strife comes from politics and from politicians using people's differences against them. So I want to talk about that because I thought it was like, it's because it comes through very interestingly, not only in the plays, there's a sequence where Aung and her mother are outside and they're watching this play about, her name is Doi, who was a female slave. And the play they're watching is from Doi's perspective. And while they're outside watching this play, which is a Cantonese opera, the men are inside the theater. So it's like the father and the brother and other men and their sons are inside the theater, and they're watching the film version of that. And it's showing how the king at that time, he became insatiable for bloodlust. And the metaphor of a vampire was very interesting and very apt. And I want you to talk about that particular sequence because I thought it was really interesting because you show where the differences isn't really cultural, is patriarchy, one, but it's also political. So I love that you made it very plainly that the ethnicities is not the problem. It's the politics and the politicians and the people in power who create the strife amongst people in communities and diverse communities.
好，因为要拍摄这部电影，有一个难度，就是因为毕竟我们在拍摄的时候还是低调拍摄，然后再加上说故事的方式，我必须要用隐晦的方式来呈现，所以这一部电影我们用了2个非常重要的著作，分别是东南亚的一本叫《马来纪年》（Malay Annals），然后另外一本当然就是来自中国的元代的杂剧关汉卿的这个《窦娥冤》的故事。那这2部著作，其实先说《窦娥冤》，《窦娥冤》刚好在那一天刚好在那个社区真的是演着那一出戏， 所以为什么叫 Snow in Midsummer？主要原因就是因为它是叫做6月雪，可是，在电影中文名我们叫5月雪，因为刚好是发生在5月。然后 Malay Annals 呢，这本书它是1612年5月13号写的，所以刚好就对称了这件事情是发生在5月13号。那 Malay Annals 这本书的诞生，基本上就是当时候这个马来半岛的这些苏丹的王朝，他为了要巩固他们的政权，就是当时有很多的一些商船从中国南来，他们就希望借着这本书来展示他们的国威，就希望你们不要来欺负我们。如果你们欺负我们的话，可能会中一些诅咒之类的。所以这本 Malay Annals 它本身就是一种结合了典故、传说还有史话。它并不是一本教科书，也不是一本所谓的历史书，它基本上就是一种所谓的展示国威的一本史书。对对，所以我们就把它串联在电影当中。所以这部电影我把它定调为它是一种比较魔幻写实。对，因为一般上历史故事通常都是比较我们依照当时发生什么来拍摄，可是这部电影呢，我就用了这种所谓的东南亚的这本马来经典 Malay Annals 跟中国的这个窦儿园结合在一起。
So it's very difficult to make a film like this, and therefore we have to be very, very low key. And one of the ways that we can do that is through our narrative. We have to rely heavily on either allegories or metaphors. So in this case, that we rely on two main texts. One is called the Malay Annals, and the other one is the story of the Injustice Do written by Guang Hanqing in the Yuan Dynasty. So one from Malaysia, one from China. For the Malay Annals part, it is actually written by the author in 1612 on the day of May 13 as well. So coincidentally, also on the same day. And it's pretty much a historical book, not so much in terms of the actual historical accounts of what happened, or whether or not it's more about the legends and this idea of how we should be respected as country facing the migrations from mainland China, and they want to have this particular fables or stories to talk about that we should be on equal footing and do not look down on us. And I think that is a very apt text for me to use as a sort of using what happened in the past to allegorize the present. And similarly for the Chinese text, for the Guang Hanqing's the Injustice Do, it is actually the production happened on the same day, 1969, on the day of May 13. That's the exact Cantonese opera being played on the day. And this particular opera is called The Snowstorm in June. Even though the actual incidents for our film happened in May, I think that the connection is so compelling that I want to connect them as well and use that as a way to allegorize the present, which is what happened in 1969. So that's very much of the, in terms of how I see this particular film as not the historical realism type of film. For me, it's almost as if that I created this particular genre called a fantastic realism with this particular film to combine not only what happened that day, but also with the allegories of the two texts, one from Malaysia and one from China.
所以像刚才你提到的巴巴妞妞，为什么会变成电影当中的那个主要的这个后裔的故事？主要原因是因为从 Malay Annals 里边的其中一个章节就写到了，当时候这个明朝的皇帝将他的女儿嫁给了马六甲的苏丹然后过后呢，中国的皇帝就逼那个马六甲的苏丹称他为王，结果后来这个马六甲苏丹就称他为王，可是不久那个中国的皇帝就染上了马红病。那当时候他的这个宫廷的这些医生说，其实你这个病是医不好的，只能够方法就是能够喝你的这个马六甲苏丹的洗脚水才能够痊愈。所以真的就这个洗脚水从 马六甲运到了中国之后呢，喝下洗脚水之后，那个明朝皇帝的病就痊愈了。所以这个故事当中，它有一个带出一个信息，就是你们两者之间都是王，大家彼此要互相尊重，不能够谁称谁王。所以从这个明朝皇帝嫁女儿的这个范本，那个汉丽宝公主其实是虚构的。后来它也变成了所谓的八八娘惹的一个来由，就是当地就是从中国嫁到东南亚的这些女人，她们跟当地的马来人结婚通婚之后，就变成了所谓的八八娘惹。那当时候的八八娘是不需要信奉回教的，可是后来近代只要你跟这个伊斯兰的这些信徒结婚就需要信奉回教，然后慢慢的这个八八娘惹它就不再会有后边的一些形成了。八八娘惹其实是从明代开始，从这本书开始就变成了一个很重要的一个范本。
So what you mentioned before about this culture called the Baba Nyanya, and actually these are the descendants of the Peranakan Chinese, and according to the Malay annals, that this is the result of the depiction of what happened during the Ming dynasties when the Sultan at the time, that the emperor of the Ming dynasty wanted to somehow create relationship with the sultans in Malacca, and then they decided to marry off the princess from China to Malaysia. And as a result, that indeed the Sultan actually sent letters to the emperors and then recognize him as the emperors or the king or as its subject or his subject. And then later on, the emperor just developed this unknown illness, gravely ill, after that particular petitions or letters being sent from
some kind of leprosy.
Yes, so it's the leprosy that developed that somehow cannot be cured. And then according to the doctors and physicians at the time from the China side, they said that the only way that you can cure this leprosy is to drink the foot bath waters of the Sultan, which is the person who actually delivered the letter in the first place. So indeed, they shipped that foot bath water from from Malaysia to China, and then cure the emperor's condition, the leprosy. So I think it's very much to indicate or allegorize this idea of that not only both of them, they are on the sort of either emperor or king of the nations, and they should be on equal footing, no pun intended, but at the same time also to derive from that is this histories of the Baba Nyanya tradition, because of the princess from China marrying the local Malays, and then they have their descendants. And at the time, if you don't have to convert to Islam or become the Muslim as a result of this particular union, but later on you sort of become something that is more practiced than before. That in terms of this conversion. So you do see that there's a thread of all these stories interconnected from not only the China side, but also the Malaysian side.
Yeah, that the information about the leprosy was very interesting to me because it made me think of, there's a Bible story, and I don't remember I don't remember his name, but there's a general in the Bible who was absolutely horrible, and he was stricken with leprosy. And the only way that he could be cured is if he got into the Jordan River, which was the most dirty river in the world at that point in time. So when that part of that allegory came into the film, I was like, how biblical.
Leprosy, yeah, about the leprosy, 其实也很巧合，就是这本书里边，就是说当时候那个皇帝他喝洗脑血之前，他就中了那个麻风病。那到时候我们2009年发现了这乱葬岗，他就葬在麻风病院的后山。所以这个麻风病院好像是早在1612年5月13号的这本书写成，就是跟麻风病有关系的。然后发生这个1969年的5月13号，这些遇难者就葬在后山。所以在电影当中，我有一个比较梦幻比较魔幻的一个角色，就是当时候的这个作家，就是叫做敦斯利拉纳，他就骑着大象告诉说， 其实有一点像是这本书是我写的，故事是由我决定的。那么在2018年的时候，他再出现的时候呢，他是驾着这个计程车，然后重新再讲多一段你们华人是很怕这个麻风病的。然后很巧的就是他把他载到麻风病的后山，就告诉他说，当年的这遇难者都葬在这麻风病院的后山。
那也在看戏的时候，1966也是他
同一个人，同一个演员。
So a little side note about the leprosy that you mentioned. Not only this is documented or recorded, written about in the Malay NYAFF, and as I mentioned before, it was written May 13th in 1912. I'm sorry, 1612, and so that also foreshadowed what happened in 1969 when on May 13, when the tragedy happened. The people being killed, they were buried in this mass grave burial ground. Just so happened it's right next to a leprosarium in Malaysia. So there's a direct connection of this particular condition and how one happened in 1612 foreshadow what's going on or going to happen in 1969. And I made a decision to really add a fantastic element to this particular relatively realism depiction of what happened, historically speaking. So in the writer of this particular Malay now is called
Tun Sri Lana.
And I create a character for it to show up in two parts. In the first part, in 1969, he was the person who was riding the elephant with the durian and then have this whole ritual of the foot bath water. The same actor also later on in 2018 is the cab driver who drove the female protagonist in the older version to the leprosarium and then behind that to find the mass burial ground for these victims. So that's an intentional element to connect everything together.
Yeah, I liked how you tied the past to the present, which at that time in the film is 2018. By having the two actors like Chong Keat, who plays Aun, she plays her mom in 1969, and then she plays present day Aun, and then to have the actor come back and play the cab driver, I thought it was an interesting narrative choice. And it kind of made me think of how in the film itself, you brought the opera from off of the stage into the film itself. It's almost like the characters jumped off of the stage and they started to interact with the real life people, kind of making it it's not magical realism, but it's almost like this surreal element of the film where like the stage play and the real life coincide. So talk to me about that, because at the beginning, when you said that if you had made this film when you were younger, it would have been different because your anger would have been driving you, and you made it when you were older because you were more calm and more level-headed, and you can approach it from a more empathetic point of view. When you said that, I was like, that makes sense for how the film is, because the film is very calmly made. It deals with a very traumatic situation, but it is very calm in like how the emotions are portrayed, and you give the characters space to do what they need to do, as well as the actresses. Especially Chong Keat, she's given a lot of time to just move through space and do what she needs to do. So talk to me about having that be the tone of the film, it being calm and giving Chong Keat like room to do what she needed to do as an actress, but also bringing the play off from the stage into her, because I think they all perfectly work together, like because a film is a play and all the pieces have to work. So that's what you did.
他是说就是拍得很温和，然后就结合了为什么会结合这个粤剧跟戏剧。
对，然后还有就是，我觉得应该是在说万方吧，应该不是在说蔡宝珠，就说为什么怎么给他开启一个这样的空间，让人可以把这样子所有的元素，照你的意思把它发挥出来。
好，因为在过去这么多年，因为我都在做民间的一些故事的收集，然后对于民俗文化，然后尤其是马来西亚跨种族的一种民俗文化比较长期都在研究，所以我想可能在无论是我的第一部电影也好，还有这一部电影也好，所以我想说在说这马来西亚的故事的时候，尝试不会去触碰太多 太过直接的一些敏感的神经线，因为在马来西亚，你触碰到宗教、触碰到种族，不光只是拍不了，可能电影也会麻烦，然后参与的人也可能会有麻烦。所以我想，可能我的情况有点像伊朗导演。对，我们在看到很多伊朗导演过去的作品，基本上在拍社会问题的时候，可能用小孩子或用一些比较温柔的方式。那我呢，就是用一种比较奇幻的一种方式来叙事。比如说像这次会用这个戏曲，主要原因就是因为戏曲它相对来说，它就比较没那么的直观的去把现代人的一些情况说出来，可是我却用比如窦尔渊，他其实窦尔渊他就是当时候元代的这个关安卿，他就是批评当时候的政府，批评当时候的贪官，所以跟我们马来西亚的情况有点相似。所以这部电影我们现在在马来西亚上映，即便是我们里边有一些戏曲，也需要被删减的，因为刚好里边的一些古老的歌词，刚好也唱着现代政府的一个情况。
So first, I want to talk about in terms of this tone that is common in nature for this particular film. It's because I have been doing a lot of field research, not only for this film, but also for my first film as well, that I will collect and do research on folk songs, folk cultures, folklores. And in Malaysia, if you want to touch upon anything that is related to either religion or race, it become very, very sensitive. And therefore, in order for me to be able to create some kind of artistic expressions and to be seen, I need to be very, very careful. And also in terms of anything that I cannot be very direct with my approach. It's not unlike the Iranian directors when they're making films that sort of a social critique of the current situation, they tend to utilize either a small child or other ways to allegorize what's going on right now, the here and now. So I took similar approach of using the Cantonese opera as a way to talk about what's going on right now in a very indirect way. This particular snowstorm in June actually is written in the Yuan dynasty by Guan Hanqing for the purpose of criticizing the government at the time for corruption.
Yeah.
And it's very much what's going on in 1969 at the time for the government that I think it will be using the past to allegorize the present by using this particular number in the Cantonese opera. And for that particular reason, we have the good fortune of now having this film in major theater release in Malaysia. And as a result, there are certain parts of the Cantonese opera in the film being muted because the lyrics actually it hit too close to home and then actually really talk about and describe what's going on right now in Malaysia.
所以总的来说，就是虽然我电影里边有出现一些神仙或者是一些宗教幽魂，基本上就是用这些来隐喻着所谓的神权、政权还有父权。
So, and that's also the reason why I have that kind of fantastic element to the film by using either deities that you can see the different religious figures, also or ghosts or spirits in my film. It's to really to talk about that kind of the power structures, whether or not it's from religion or power structure as a result of political power, and also the power structure of the patriarchy.
然后另外一个可能最大的原因是因为我本身是来自一个基统的一个家庭，我父亲、我妈妈他们都是 medium， 所以可能从小就特别了解他们所谓的神的世界啊、鬼魂的世界啊，然后甚至这些所谓的仪式，从小都看到大。当然我本身不是所谓的信徒，可是后来念电影之后，发觉到我的叙事方式可能就因为我父母亲。然后就开始把他们小时候带给我的一些影响 变成说故事的一个方式。
So also because of my personal experience growing up with my parents, both of them are mediums, that they somehow will have a lot of practices and rituals that will connect the realms of the ghostly realms or the godly realms with different deities. So I'm not a believer myself, but at the same time, I'm so used to all these different type of rituals and beliefs and or histories from my parents. I sort of use that as a way to structure my narrative for this particular film, because of my personal connection with the fact that both of my parents are mediums.
Yeah, I know that you have to be very careful in making this film, and like I can see the research coming in, because like the scene where Angan is in the kitchen and she's preparing food for the ancestral rites. But if you listen to what is playing on the radio, like you get all of these cues about what the film is about, and like the political state, not only of Malaysia in 2018, but like even in 1969. And so like you get that, and like the person on the radio does talk about the Malay annals that you mentioned. So like the amount of research you did comes through in all of these fine little details in the film. And I think we have time for one last question. So my last question is about Chang Jun-shuo. So she, as I mentioned, so she plays her like Angan's mother in 1969. She plays Guna Angan, but Angan as a child doesn't speak. Her brother doesn't speak too. Her little brother didn't speak too. And I was wondering the entire time, I was like, is this selective mutism? And I was thinking of it as like the way like the kids don't have a voice at that point in time because of like how culture and society works. Like the children were like, I don't have a voice in this situation. I'm just going along with whatever the adults want me to do. And then as an adult, she doesn't really speak. In the kitchen, she doesn't talk. But then the first time you only hear her speak is right at the end, where she's at the gravesite with the opera singer. And she talks, and I thought it was very interesting the language she speaks in, because she doesn't speak in Malay, and I don't believe it's Mandarin. I believe it's Cantonese. So I want to ask you about her and about, first of all, casting Chang Jun-shuo and like the decision to have her play both characters, and then the silence of Angan for the entirety of the film right up until the end.
想来个
就是两个部分，为什么这个万芳的角色从小孩子一直到长大之后都是没有发育权，对，为什么都这种问题？然后另外一方面就是最后的陈财宝珠的那个角色，为什么在最后的时候他们对话的时候是用广东话
？OK， 好，其实我跟这个万在选角的时候，基本上是因为我们在马来西亚找不到演员。我们真是本来想要拍14个女人的故事，可是我们从14女人一直减到2个女人，后来只有蔡宝珠马来西亚人愿意演，然后还有万芳在台湾他愿意演。主要原因是因为那时候马来西亚很多的演员都敏感，不敢接这部戏，然后基本上就不联络我。然后这部电影基本上是当我设计这2个女人的时候，我们有一个非常关键的字叫失语，就是失去语言的失语，包括国家的失语、民族的失语，还有女性的失语。所以刚才他讲到的，比如说像那个万芳，她在厨房在做料理的时候，就是一个女性，她在厨房里边，她其实完全就虽然掌控着厨房，可是她这个家里的一个失语权是完全没有办法用言语来表达的。然后补充一点是，刚才他说到那个 radio station 的那个段落讲，那个广播是我的声音来的。然后马来西亚版本是整段是需要消音的，因为敏感。对，所以基本上是，所以整部电影里边我们还是强调就是女性的失语，乃至国家的这个历史的失语。
So in terms of the casting for these two main female characters in my films, it was a decision that sort of become a necessity. We have to make that decision because in the beginning, for the script, I had 16 female characters in mind. I'm sorry, 14 characters in mind. And the reason for it is because the compelling stories through my research are from 14 different female members of the family. So I really want to capture everything comprehensively. But after I approached during the casting process, Malaysian actors and actresses, that they, as soon as they heard that this is a film about May 13, incidents, they didn't want to even continue the discussions or want to be part of the film. So the only two people actually decided to take on their role. One is the Taiwanese actress Wan Fang from, and the other one is Palitra from Malaysia. So they got on board very early on and also stayed with the production. And one for these two, I think that there's a very important aspect I want to portray for the film is the sense of, you use the word muted, but they are voiceless in such a way that they are voiceless in terms of the national histories of what happened. They're voiceless in terms of their ethnic identity, and they're voiceless in terms of as a female person within the overall patriarchal society. So I was very intentional to trying to tease that out with their characters throughout the films. And one side note, the radio stations that being broadcast that you mentioned that when she was cooking, that she was listening to, that is actually my voice. And that was the program I did when I was in the national radio station. And as a result of that, since it is so sensitive, that it has been muted literally by the Censorship Bureau when we negotiate the film to be released in Malaysia.
所以在现实中，其实虽然我这部电影要讲的是诗语，可是我们这部电影上个星期就是我们花了大概6个月的时间，跟马来西亚的电检局 Censorship Board 终于可以上映。可是我们有27处，27个地方需要消音，需要 remute 消音，然后用模糊掉，然后甚至是变黑的这个影遮蔽住。所以这部电影它在马来西亚现在上映了，可是还是有一点部分是失语的。
So ironically, the idea of voicelessness in the film is also part of the process that we negotiated with the Censorship Bureau for the past 6 months in order for this film to be shown right now, currently in July, starting in July in Malaysia. And part of the voiceless, I guess, adjustments. There are 27 of them throughout the films, that's been censored, either being muted, being blurred out, being blackened, or also blacked out for certain part of the film. And I think that also gives some complexity to not only the film, but also the censored film currently in Malaysia.
So basically, it's like life imitating art imitating life. I wish we had more time, but we don't. But thank you so much, Chong Keat Aun. I appreciate you taking the time to speak to me, and I appreciate this film. I've never seen a depiction of Cantonese opera this way on film, so I really appreciate the way you did it. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you, Vincent, for your interpretation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good evening, both of you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.